Hey, welcome back to Bridal Sewing Techniques, and today we're going to talk about how to lengthen the waist of a gown. Now, before we get to the sewing, I need to show you that there are quite a few ways to deal with having a gown where the bodice is shorter than, say, the trunk of the bride. Okay, so I sketched something up for you. This is a very rough sketch. I do apologize. I just used like paint or something. I did not even use a real drawing app. But this video has taken a long time to get together, and so I was focusing, as usual, on getting the content out of there instead of just focusing on perfection. But let's sketch this together, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here I'm drawing a girl with a really long trunk, okay? So if you put on a gown that has a waistline at the natural waist, and this example has an A-line skirt. If you put that on here, you can see it doesn't quite come up high enough, okay? So one choice you have is you can extend the waist. You can actually add some fabric at the waist, and it would almost be like a band, or, you know, you could do it pretty ways or whatever, and raise it that way. Another way that you can fix this problem, and this is the most common, is just build up the top. You can do it with lace, fabric, you can add straps. I just drew all three on there. But, you know, that's the most common way. Another way that you can do it, if they really like the look of the short bodice on their body, which they very well may because they're used to seeing a long torso, and it's, you know, the grass is greener kind of thing, you can actually lengthen the bodice on the inside of the dress. This is the lining layer of the dress. You can lengthen the boning and all that and keep the bodice length the same, so it still looks like it's going to look more like an umpier waist on them, just a little bit shorter of a bodice than what their natural waist would call for. So here's your choices when dealing with needing to lengthen the bodice. And this last one is what we're going to do in this video. We're going to lengthen the bodice on the inside. Okay, so we need to understand, first of all, how boning works, okay? What boning does is they're stiff sticks that lock on the hips. So you want a tight waist on the gown, and you need it to be where the gown cannot slip down onto the hips or below the hips or something like that. It needs to be locked in. So you can see, according to this sketch, we're going to, on the inside of the dress, lock into those hips, and we're going to use this 4-inch elastic to really help drive it home. You can do this with only boning. I've done it that way before, but the elastic is really going to help. The way I'm spanning my fingers, this is the way that we're going to put it in. This would not work if you had a very gathered, loose lining, by the way. You would have to change the shape of the lining to be able to make it tight and fitted to her shape. So here's 2 strips of the 4-inch elastic cut out, and I also showed you the boning. So what we're going to have to do is, using the side seams, we're going to extend the boning by another 3 or 4 inches. And we're going to put those elastics in the side seams at the same time, so that when you pull on the side, when you pull on the elastic, you're also pulling that boning back, and the boning goes from her underarm all the way to her hips. Okay, so in this demonstration, this dress was already shortened at the waist a little bit. And that is not part of this alteration. So please excuse the extra little fabric at the waist. And generally, we would adjust the waist first, and then we would adjust the length of the gown. But the hip of the skirt was a little bit too tight, and since it was at A-line, if we raised it, it made the hip fit. So that's why we did it what appears to be out of order. So just ignore that feature of this alteration. Everything else is going to be the same. So what I'm doing here is I'm opening the side seams. And the lining layer, there's 2 skirt layers of the lining. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open them up, and I'm going to put 2 little slits in it. You'll see it in a minute. and I'm going to stack them together and sew them together. That's just going to make it a little bit stronger, so that I don't have only one layer of the skirt holding it together when I have the option to use two. I have done this before with one skirt layer. If it's not strong enough, if you feel like it's stressing the lining fabric too much, then sometimes you need to go ahead and do like a Petersham belt around the waist along the lining layer to strengthen some things. Some of you are going to understand what I just said, and some of you won't, and that's okay. You don't have to understand it to learn to do this alteration. It's just something extra I threw in there. I'm trying to reach out to quite a few different sewing levels on these videos. So I hope you don't ever feel like you're drowning in information. Just keep on plowing through. There should be plenty of stuff for you to pick up on no matter what your sewing level. Okay, so I'm pinning these layers together. And now I'm going to snip them. Otherwise, you would have one of the layers would be bunched up when it tried to cross over into the other layer. Now, when I start sewing on this, and I didn't cut a lot out of this sewing job, so I know this is a longer video. When I start sewing on this, if I start doing anything that you're like, yeah, I got it, and you don't have time to sit and watch every little detail, this is what you do. Go down to the bottom right of the video and you'll see a cog. Click on that, click on speed, and then you can change it to 2 times the speed, and it'll speed the video up for you. That way you're still seeing what I'm doing, but you don't have to watch it in real time. All right, so here I'm taking up the bodice part of the gown. And now I'm going to take up the skirt part, and we're going to make it tighter than it was, because this is now going to be her waist instead of it being her hip, because her waist is so much longer. And as we know, waists are skinnier than hips, so we have to bring it in a little bit. There, I just sewed the 2 layers together. I'm going to do that on each side, just so it doesn't slip. This is a very slippery dress. As you can tell, it keeps sliding out of frame. Okay, so I have repositioned the dress, and now what I'm sewing is I'm sewing the bodice to the skirt, because what I want is the bodice to be sewn to the skirt for the front and the back, and just have one seam that goes down that establishes the side seam. A lot of times it's sewn in the opposite order, but that's not how I'm doing it here. And you can see that extra satin overhanging. Remember, that's where we shortened the skirt at the waist. So you can ignore that part. So now what I've done is I've sewn the side seam down, save maybe 2 inches, and we have the hip open. So I've left probably a 4.5, 5-inch gap that I'm going to be able to slip that elastic through. So I'm feeding it through, You see the bust pad. This is helping visually establish this is the side seam. I'm going to sew the elastic down to the seam allowance, and then I'm going to make the side seam. Okay, so I just sewed that down. And that'll just take some of the responsibility off of the side seam. So if there were, say, a couple of loose threads by the end of the night or something, there's something else holding the elastic in place. And now I'm going to make the shape of the side seam. And this shows clearly what I was talking about how I joined the bodice to the skirt, and then I'm making the side seam just in one line. And my idea of where to make the side seam and how has come from my fitting process. So I've seen her in this dress. I know how it fits her, and I know what the shape of the seam, how it needs to be made. And those slits that I just put in there, that has to do with the extra fabric from where I took up the length of the skirt. It does not have to do with this alteration that we're doing for this video. Here's my little box of muslin squares. Again, this is muslin fabric cut in like 1 by 1 inch squares. Nothing magical going on here, but I keep them on hand so that I can cap my bones. For 2 sticks of boning, you have to, of course, cap them 4 times. So here we go. This is one of the things that would be, this would be something to learn for somebody who hasn't worked with boning very much. It's a really interesting thing to learn. But to someone who is a veteran seamster who's been doing bridal for years, that's not particularly fascinating for you. So just talking again about how I have different audiences. And also, please keep in mind my philosophy of sewing. I do have a Q&A video that you can find on my channel that talks about my philosophy of sewing. I try to not get overly technical. I'm not into that. I'm more into the art side of this. This is an expression, an extension of the bride's form, that kind of thing. So you don't hear a lot of technical speak from me. You also don't hear a lot of rigidity. So I'm not going to tell you, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. I'm king of the castle and everybody else is a dirty rascal. And sometimes you'll see some seamsters on here that will leave comments that have that attitude. And I just want you guys out there that are watching this video, I just want you to know that I don't support that attitude. So you're not going to hear that from me. If I tell you you can't do it that way, then it's like, it's for reals. You can't do it that way. It might rip or something. But I would definitely say it in a non-judgmental way. Who wants a self-righteous little snooty seamster teaching you, right? So that's not how I am. And those comments are not welcome. But I love to hear comments of the different ways that people do things. Of course, again, having respect and the acknowledgement that seamsters do things differently. So I love those comments. So you could share down below, for example, of, that if you were doing this, how you most often do it, that kind of thing. And I think that would help build our community here. So as you saw, I just added the boning in, dropped it down a few inches longer than what was on the other side. I didn't feel like it needed any commentary. The visuals completely speak for themselves with that. You just sew the boning down on the inside. One row of stitches for one seam allowance and one row for the other side. So you can see I've done the same work on both sides now. I didn't bore you with those details. And now we need to deal with the elastic waistband. This is really going to kind of help pull things in for her and give her lots of support. If we didn't have these elastic waistbands in, we would have had to do like a inner Petersham band, and we would have had to extend more boning sticks than just the 2 boning sticks. We would have been looking at more like 6. And I think I have a video that I've done that on already. I'll scrounge around and see if I can find it. Now I'm showing myself tunneling up in the skirt. Somebody had a question about that on the last video. I'm tunneling up between the layers. And what I've done is I've pinched the seam where the bodice joins the skirt. I've pinched it for the outer layers and the inner layers. They're pinched together and they're aligned. And now I need to tack those together. They need to be tethered together so that the support that the lining layer is giving her now, that support is also transferred to the outer layer. If you do not tether them together, the outer layer may buck up or behave differently. You might get some horizontal wrinkling in the gown, that kind of thing. Okay, so the way I'm going to tether this is I'm using a very thick thread, as you can see. And you can use different kinds of threads for this. Just make sure it's strong. Okay, so I'm doing 2 square knots. That's 4 times you knot it. And then the 5th one is an overhand knot that covers the 4. And that's going to keep the 2 tails from coming apart. So if you do that and leave a nice little long tail on there, put a little dot of hypo cement or something on it, you're golden. Okay, and then here at the top of the side seam, I'm just going to stitch in the ditch here. And that makes it stronger where the hang loop is. A lot of times when a gown comes, the lining layer is the only thing the hang loop is attached to anymore. And it's pulling up on the dress and it's bending the boning. So I like to stitch in the ditch for that, and it really makes the dress a lot stronger. Now, everything that I've gotten together here is for the ends of the elastic, because we need to turn this into a belt. Okay, so what I've done is I've cut Petersham. I'm trying to remember what this is. This is 1.5, 2 inch, something like that, Petersham. And it's cut to be, I don't know, the elastic is 4 inches long. This was probably about 6 inches. And I'm gonna sew a stick of boning in there. That way the elastic belt can't scrunch up where you hook it together. It'll keep it nice and stout. And you can see I'm gesturing how I'm gonna sew that over the end of the elastic. And I'm gonna do it again over here. Okay, so what I have here are slides, like you would normally put in, say, the waistband of pants or something like that. They're good and strong. They're going to be a little stronger than hooks and loops. So I'm going to sew these sets onto here. To make sure I sew it right, I'm just going to, every now and then, pick it up and kind of pretend like I'm hooking the belt together, make sure they're aligned correctly and I'm sewing them on the correct side, all that. If you want to know how I tied that knot, I do have a video on how to tie a knot. You can actually tie a knot so fast, like it would just be a blur if you tied it full speed. That's a very efficient knot. It's also really efficient when you drop your stuff and it goes sliding across the table. Just, that's how I roll. Saves me so much time. All right, so I'm gonna sew this down, and I'm gonna sew it down very thoroughly. I'm using a nice thick thread, as you can tell. And I'm gonna sew it using every little hole that it gives me so that this is not slipping around. This waistband is going to be very critical for her comfort, for her security. She is going to be so happy when she puts this dress on and feels the security inside of her dress. There, I'm gesturing for how it's going to be put together. And don't forget, I do offer sewing retreats if you ever want to make a trip and come to my studio and observe. I have 1 day, 1 week, and 2 week retreats that I offer. I have different packages. So you can go to my website, www.bridalsewingtechniques.com, and request information about that. I also have a book coming up. And I also have links to the products that I use. So if ever you see me using something on here, say my sewing machine, for instance, where did she get that? What model is that? You can go to the products page of my website and it'll tell you all about it and give you a link to it. So those are all there to help you. You're under no obligation to use any of it. If you are just a DIY kind of person and don't have anything extra to invest money-wise or anything like that, and you have everything you need, that is fine. You just use these videos and enjoy them, and we're glad you're here. This is one knotty string of thread, isn't it? Isn't that funny how sometimes it'll behave perfectly and then other times you'll get twisty? Ah, see, I'm putting some back pressure on the eye of my needle using the table. Anytime, see, it's getting a little thick, so I'm pushing with the table. Anytime things get a little thick, don't wear your bones out. Go ahead and use a tool, push against a table, or grab a pair of pliers to pull that through. This is quite a stubborn piece of thread. Sometimes, after it tangles up 3 or 4 times, I'll just knot it off and I'll start over and just wax the thread again really well and start over. And a lot of times you won't have the problem again. It's just something in the twist of that particular strand. But we're pushing this through boning, you know, so it's a little more stiff than normal. All right, so I'm going to do 2 sets for this belt. You do get by with using fewer sets when you put the boning in there. You would need more sets without the boning, and then it would probably still rumple up a little bit. So I think this is probably the best way to go for me. So now I'm going to put the hypo cement on the knots so that I know they are not going to come undone on her. And I think I just triple knotted these. Three knots plus hypo cement is usually adequate. And then now I'm going to sew these down to the end of the elastic. I was so disappointed. I hit record and something didn't go right. I don't know, I didn't hit it right or something. And I didn't get to show you the whole deal of me sewing it on the end of the elastic, but you'll see I demonstrated for you anyways. So here I'm showing where I'm going to cut the elastic. I'm just laying it flat along the inside of the dress, and I'm just going to make it like 1 inch shorter. So it's going to be approximately an inch shy of the zipper. That way you know that you have to pull on it a little bit to get it to hook together, because the elastic is going to work best when it's stretched a little bit. And here's where I'm demonstrating sewing this down, but obviously I would sew it down on one side, then I would flip the Petersham over and I would sew it again. So it was not a single pass. That footage has gone on to footage heaven. I don't know where it went. It didn't happen. So here's me being fake. I'm sewing back over something I already sewed. But it looks so legit. It looks so real and clean. Nobody would ever look at the inside of this belt and be like, ew, who made this for you? You know? It looks beautiful. That's our goal. All right, so we got one last thing we need to do. I've got this ribbon that I have cut out, and we're going to make a little tunnel of ribbon. And that's going to act almost like guardrails. That's going to keep your elastic from slipping up or down. The elastic, trust me, is not going to slip down because the hips are wider. It's always going to go to an easier way, so it would have gone up. And if the elastic went up, that would allow the back of the dress to sag, or sometimes it comes up and peeks out of the top of the zipper, and that's ugly. So basically what you do is you just make a little loop of ribbon. And here I've tacked it in. You just tack it at the top and the bottom, and you make sure that there's enough clearance for the belt. And when they put her in the dress, they need to feed the strap through these little ribbon tunnels. And that's also going to pull the zipper in toward her back. Here's an x-ray view of the structure that's going on within the dress, and the bride was absolutely thrilled. Being a long-waisted woman, she hadn't felt a very supportive strapless gown before. Please leave comments and questions down below. I'd love to help if I can. I hope this has helped you. Thank you for joining me.